Hey everybody, welcome to Charting with Dan. I'm Dan Murrell, joined by Lon Harris. Lon, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Not as many records to discuss this week.
Oh, how could there be?
There could never be as many as we discussed.
We set the record for most records discussed.
I think it was a record-setting episode of Charting with Dan, but there's some stuff that we do want to talk about. Worldwide, we now have a second highest grossing movie of all time worldwide. Everyone's talking about, I saw the On Your Left stuff coming up with Avatar and Endgame all weekend. We're going to talk about that. Is it a fait accompli that Avengers Endgame will be the highest grossing movie of all time? Or is there a little more to it? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. We're also going to talk about a couple of questions that I got from people about the box office in the last week or so. We're going to break down, but first let's look at what happened this weekend here in North America, or should I say in the U.S. and Canada. I always say U.S. and I forget Canada.
Oh, can't forget
US
Canada.
and Canada at the box office this weekend. Avengers Endgame, well, we knew this was going to happen. Number one again, $147 million. That is the second best second weekend of all time. We'll dive down into that in just a second because, as always, it's not apples to apples. There's some numbers to bore down into.
Always.
But looking at the top 5 opening weekends of all time, it was the second biggest drop, 58.7% drop from last weekend. That's actually standard to not bad for a superhero film.
Yeah.
A superhero film that opened to $357 million, also not bad. That's the second biggest drop of the top 5 highest opening weekends of all time domestically. Of course, it's also by far the highest grossing, so you are going to see a bit of an inflated drop. The Last Jedi dropped more in its second weekend. However, it had a weird schedule fluke because its Friday, Saturday, Sunday included Christmas Eve, which is not a very big movie day. Christmas Day is a very big movie day. So it's not, that's the problem with just surface comparisons and everything. There are always these little things that you can look at. So the second biggest drop from week 1 to week 2 of the top 5 highest opening movies domestically. The Intruder opened at number 2. Even going into the weekend, people thought it might open at number 3 or number 4. It overperformed expectations. And this is a case of looking at 3 movies that opened with somewhat similar numbers, within $2 million of each other, and these are all different stories. For example, The Intruder, $10.8 million. That was an outperform of expectations, and that's actually not bad because the film's budget was $8 million. So you have an $8 million budget, you open to $10.8 million. Not too shabby.
No, it's it's clearly something they didn't spend a ton of money on. It feels very like 90s to me, that movie. It feels like a throwback.
Not just because Dennis Quaid is in it.
Right, but studios don't really put out those kind of mid-level thrillers anymore. So in that way, it kind of feels, it's a small movie that kind of got up there. People were interested.
Yeah. The movie that a lot of people expected to open in second place actually opened in third place. Long Shot opened with $9.7 million. The difference between it and Intruder being, Intruder had an $8 million budget. Long Shot, a reported $40 million budget. So there's a case of a movie, 2 movies that open with similar numbers, but vastly different stories. That's not a very good opening for Long Shot.
No.
Even with a $40 million budget, you want to open a little stronger than that. Plus the cinema score, a B for a comedy, not great. This was a very strong reviewed movie critically, but it seems like both the people that turned up to the movie theater and looking at the cinema score, the people didn't even really connect to it as strongly as critics did, and it didn't drive a lot of business.
Yeah, we were just talking about sort of, Intruder as being kind of a throwback, sort of a 90s movie. Like, this also strikes me as from an era when movie stars opened movies, and that you would be like, well, Seth Rogen and Charlize Theron in a movie together, that's going to open, but we're just not in that kind of marketplace anymore. Unless it's an IP or a brand, that's what sells a movie.
Yeah.
Movie stars, it depends on the project.
I don't think the movie was marketed very well. I think they marketed it because they had a Seth Rogen movie, so they marketed it largely like a Seth Rogen movie, which it has some similarities, but it also, I don't know. I think there's a lot of reasons you can go into maybe why it didn't perform well, but a bit of an underperformance from Long Shot. Its hope is that it's going to do have some legs, do a little bit of business. However, we're going into the meat of the movie season, so
it seems like one that if people eventually like it, they'll discover it on VOD.
Exactly.
And streaming.
Yeah. The movie with the highest reported budget opened in 4th place and last of the 3 new releases, Ugly Dolls. Animated film opened with $8.6 million. Not a franchise starter, Lon.
No. I mean, this is one of those where they make the dolls and they were like, wouldn't it be great if we could expand this brand by getting people to see a movie that's an ad for the dolls?
Yeah.
Worked for Lego, but it's a hard needle to thread.
$45 million, too, for an animated film is pretty low budget for animation.
Yeah.
So, not a franchise starter here in North America,
Maybe
but...
they'll get an animated Hulu series out of it.
You never know.
Yeah,
Strange things happen.
Right.
And then at the number 5 spot, spending its 8th week out of the last 9 in the top 5, Captain Marvel. Marvel bookends right there. Captain Marvel passed $420 million. It's number 6th on the MCU domestic list, just above Iron Man 3. But let's talk about Endgame. That's the one that people want to talk about. It was obviously, for the second week, the big box office story. We talked about the fact that it was the second best second weekend of all time. Let's look at those numbers. So it fell just short. Even though it was higher than expectations, than the estimates were yesterday, it fell less than $2 million short of the second weekend record that was set by Star Wars The Force Awakens, but healthily above Infinity War. Black Panther was number 4 on that list, Jurassic World, number 5. Here's the difference. If you look at the second weekend for The Force Awakens, it's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday were December 25th, 26th, and 27th. Christmas Day, the day after Christmas, and the 2 days after Christmas. Those are 3 of the most heavily trafficked movie days of the year.
Everybody's home.
Everyone's
off.
home.
They're sick of their family.
Exactly. So while some people might say, like, oh, man, is this a sign that it's losing some steam and some momentum compared to The Force Awakens? Not exactly, because if you look at the weekend, there was the first weekend in May, which is usually a big blockbuster weekend as far as opening movie, but not as heavily trafficked as Christmas Day weekend, and certainly not for week 2 of a movie. It almost beat a movie that had a prime second weekend during the three of the most heavily trafficked movie days of the year. It almost did. That's the kind of business that we're talking about that that Endgame is doing. If it were going to be more analogous to what happened with Infinity War, the gross would have dropped to more of what Infinity Wars was, which is about $30-some-odd million below what Endgame does. So we talk about the numbers and how they're impressive. The Mondays, the weekdays that it's putting up are good for a summer. They're good for a holiday. The fact that it's happening on a non-summer, non-holiday weekend.
Normal life is still happening.
Normal life is still happening. People aren't off work. People aren't off school.
Actually, this weekend, there were a lot of graduations. It's like a busy time of the year for people. It's definitely not just go see movie days.
Yeah, exactly. And really, when you look at the 3 days, at the daily grosses, which I looked at, that Christmas Day gross was the difference maker. Endgame actually outgrossed The Force Awakens for Saturday and Sunday. It's just that Force Awakens had such a huge monster day on Christmas Day, people going to see the movie. It outdid what Endgame did this past Friday. That was the difference maker, and Endgame just couldn't shrink that lead enough on Saturday and Sunday.
Also 40 minutes longer.
Yeah, exactly. It's a longer movie. So it fell just short of the second weekend record, but no, I don't think anyone's unhappy with how it's doing. Lon, one of the questions, I don't know who in the world would possibly be.
If you're upset with how it's doing, you need to adjust your expectations.
It's a phenomenal success. Let's look at, Lon, there's a couple things I want to address. The first one being, a lot of people said, what does Endgame look like according to inflation? If you factor in inflation, what does the movie look like? We've done this with a few different movies. Oh, the only reason we've done it with a few different movies is because it's not often you see a phenomenally successful movie like this come along. But let's look at where Endgame, after just 2 weekends, is on the all-time adjusted for inflation list. Adjusted for inflation meaning if ticket prices always cost the same as they do right now, what would it be? Right now, Endgame is number 42 on the list, all-time, domestically, all-time. Not just this year, like all-time. Past The Last Jedi, past Home Alone. It's sneaking up on Independence Day. It's sneaking up on the original Spider-Man. This is after 2 weekends of release, less than 2 full weeks.
Yeah, I mean, Home Alone, you're talking about a movie that definitely played for months. In theaters for months.
Yes. Independence Day, the biggest movie of that summer. Spider-Man, a box office record setter in its own right as far as the highest, at one time, the highest opening weekend of all time.
And one of the main successes responsible for this entire world of comic book and superhero movies we see now.
Yeah, and Endgame is just going to rise on this list. This week, it's going to pass movies like Ghostbusters, the original, the last Avengers movie,
Yes,
Avengers
right.
Infinity War, Sleeping Beauty. We're going to keep track of that because we did it with Black Panther too, because it was such a phenomenal success, particularly as it was just smashing through records, February records at that time when it came out. We're going to keep track of that too. The other thing that people asked about was, well, what about like tickets sold? If you want to look at just number of actual tickets sold, right now it's estimated that Endgame, if you look at the average ticket price versus how much it's gross, has sold an estimated about 68 million, 69 million tickets thus far. The all-time record holder adjusted for inflation is Gone with the Wind. It's sold over 200 million.
Yeah.
So if you look at the all-time record of how many people have actually sat in a theater and watched it, now Gone with the Wind's had a lot of re-releases over the years.
Sure.
Obviously, it's an 80-year-old movie.
It also played theatrically for years.
Yeah.
So but that is it's amazing to think about how much smaller the world population was when
Yes.
Gone with the Wind was out. So the chunk of humanity on the planet that had seen that movie.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is just looking domestically.
Right.
But yes.
It's staggering.
It's yes. Endgame has sold less than a third of the amount of tickets
Right.
that Gone with the Wind has sold since it came out. So that's just really impressive. I mean, that just puts into perspective what kind of thing. And you look at how many tickets the original Star Wars is, but then again, you factor in re-releases, you factor in everything else. There's always something you scratch under the numbers, you find something else. That's what this show's all about. Let's look at the top per theater average. Lon, of course, it was Avengers Endgame for a second week, $31,614 per theater. To put that in perspective, that's close to what you'd see from an average blockbuster on its opening weekend. For example, Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom made about $35K per theater, or sorry, $33K per theater. Captain Marvel made about $35K per theater. So Avengers Endgame in week 2 doing per theater what you would expect a huge, a successfully launching franchise movie would do in week 2, which when you look at about $142 million, that's what you look at for
about right.
a great opening salvo for a movie that's not a juggernaut like Avengers Endgame. So, Lon, something that people asked me to delve into, and I wanted to a little bit before we get into the worldwide numbers, we're going to talk about Avatar, is there are a lot of people that were asking with the rise of the subscription service, particularly AMC A-List, which a lot of people have done in the last year or so. Sure. A lot of people ask me, so how does that affect ticket sales? I pay $20 a month for AMC A-List. I've gone to see Avengers 3 or 4 or 5, however many times. Does that affect the gross? How's that calculated? The short answer is it doesn't affect it. So let's move on to the worldwide numbers. No. The short answer is it doesn't make a difference, but I did want to kind of delve into why it doesn't make a difference and how this works. And to put that in perspective, you have to look, I think, first of all, at the business model that didn't work and how we got into this position to begin with. So the way that it worked before AMC A-List, when people were doing, what I picked out was MoviePass, but this works for Cinemia, which also just folded.
Right.
A lot of the third party,
the subscription third party model.
Exactly. The subscription third party model. This was how that model would work, which basically you would pay MoviePass $10 a month for unlimited tickets. You would go to the theater. Let's say you went to an AMC theater, you used your MoviePass. MoviePass would pay AMC the ticket price. So MoviePass essentially was buying the ticket from AMC. You were just paying MoviePass a flat fee to go to as many movies as you want. So AMC gets the full ticket price from MoviePass. It's about a $9 average right now each time you go. And then AMC, as with all theaters, they pay a percentage of their ticket sales to the studios. Now, across a movie's release, they say it's about their movie theaters are paying 50 to 60% of the gross of what they get to the theaters. But, for example, it's been reported that for opening week, there are some contracts from studios that say that theaters are paying them 90% of what they make for ticket sales. Usually, the newer a movie is, the more a movie theater is paying to the studio as far as what is brought in from a ticket sale.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of the times theater owners and distributors, they like movies that are going to play longer, not necessarily going to have these huge opening weekends because they make more money on week 3, like a greater percentage than they do on weekend 1.
On weekend 1. So the worst nightmare for a theater owner is a movie that opens huge in 1 week. They pay 90% of the tickets to sales to the studios, and then nobody comes in week 2 or 3 because now they're not bringing in as much money. But if you look at that model, the reason why it didn't work, as you could see, is that you're paying MoviePass a flat fee, and MoviePass is paying out $9 on average per movie to every theater that you go to. So MoviePass, their only source of income is that $10 a month you're paying them. Well, that's wiped out on average by you using it once per month, which many people did. That's why it didn't work as a business model, because they had one source of income, and that was you paying them, and then they were essentially wiping that out if you used their service once. Right. It was a stupid business model.
Well,
we all took advantage of it, and it didn't work out.
They were hoping they could spend all that venture capital, get everybody to sign up, and then once everybody was signed up, they'd jack up the prices, and then they'd be
strike
fine.
some deal with the theaters, whatever.
Or that people wouldn't use it, and so they'd be paying the money, and they'd keep it, and then they'd never have to buy tickets, but it didn't work.
So here's how it works with AMC. This is why it doesn't change how they calculate the money. Why, if you're an AMC A-list subscriber, you can go see Avengers as many times as you want. It doesn't change how much money goes to the studios. You pay $20 a month to AMC for 3 movies a week if you're an A-list member. AMC then still pays the studios a percentage of the ticket sales for every ticket that you buy, but they're not paying, for example, you're paying AMC $20 a month. If you go see Avengers Endgame, they're paying the 90 or 80 or 70 or 60% of that price of the ticket sale that they would pay, but it's not, it's not the whole ticket price. So whereas MoviePass is paying in AMC $10, AMC's just paying out the percentage that they have to send to the studio.
Yeah, they don't have to buy you a ticket to their own theater.
Right, no, they already own the theater.
They're going to show that movie anyway.
They're showing the movie anyway. They're just paying out the percentage that they'd have to give to the studios because you're going to see the movie. But the difference is that AMC, not only are you paying AMC the $20 a month to be on the A-list, but AMC, when you go to their theater, you're likely going to buy something, a drink, a snack, something, not everybody. So AMC is also making money from you on concessions. And that's the money maker for every theater is concessions. The margins on concessions are ridiculously high. Yeah. And that's why people consider it a more stable base for AMC. Number one, you're already paying them $20 a month, whether you use it or not. So they have that amount of income coming in. Number two, when you come in, it's likely that you are still giving them more money on top of that. You're incentivized really to come in if you're an A-list subscriber, because you can go see movies at a more of a volume for cheaper. You're also spending more money in their chains. But if you subscribe to something like A-List, as far as what money goes out to the studios and how it's reported, it's the same as buying a ticket for Endgame on Fandango, or if you walk up to the ticket counter. That doesn't change. All it changes is how the theater chain itself makes its money, but that's why it's a little bit more of a stable business model. So the long answer to that very simple question that was asked of me is that it doesn't change anything if you subscribe to one of these services. All it does is change how that chain makes its money slightly. So there you go. All right, let's look at the top worldwide over the weekend. We know what movie was number one. It was Avengers Endgame, pocketed just another almost $500 million, $429 million in its second weekend. That's about a third of what it made last weekend and its huge $1.2 billion opening debut. But you also have to keep in mind that last week's quote-unquote weekend gross included Wednesday and Thursday grosses from some markets. So it's a big drop-off, yes, but there were also 2 extra days of grosses that were reported, whereas the weekend grosses for this period, your typical Friday, Saturday, Sunday, still not too shabby. I'll take $429 million. The interesting thing is the number 2 film on that list, Capernaum. That was it's a Lebanese film. It was nominated for Best Foreign Film, the Best Foreign Film Oscar this year, amongst many other awards. It was in the Cannes Film Festival. It won the jury prize last year. That's just from China. It's one of those weird, we talked about with Green Book earlier this year, how Green Book came out and it just surprised a lot of people with how well it did. This is another film. It was not anticipated to make that much money. It's a China only. It's opened almost everywhere else in the world. Yeah, it's already on VOD, I believe, in the U.S. Yeah, it's open almost everywhere else in the world, but that's another film that we've seen this year in a strange trend of these sort of prestige awards films that come out in China, and through word of mouth, through exceptionally strong reactions on social media, has had a surprisingly strong gross in that country. So that's another interesting thing to look at when you're looking at the Chinese market, is you're starting to see smaller films that you wouldn't anticipate having a stronger degree of appeal in the Chinese market. I wonder if, as the popularity of going to see films grows and there's just so many more theaters and it's just becoming a larger activity, if there's a
film buff community growing in China that's going to go start seeing these kinds of eclectic movies.
It's very interesting to watch and see how it's evolving from the blockbuster mentality to now you're seeing the market embrace these smaller films. So Capernaum, that's a single market gross, just China, but very interesting to see the fact that it did so well.
Yeah.
Long Shot, The Intruder, and Ugly Dolls, those are mainly just based off. Intruder and Ugly Dolls, pretty much based off of domestic grosses. A little bit of foreign money for Ugly Dolls, none for The Intruder, and then about $3 million in overseas grosses for Long Shot. But those are mainly driven by their domestic releases, and everybody was going to see Avengers Endgame anyway. Yeah. So here's the big news, and what we really want to talk about is that, first of all, Avengers Endgame joined the select 2 billion club. It has become one of only a handful of films to gross over $2 billion worldwide. It is now the second highest grossing film of all time worldwide. It just passed Titanic, depending on your source. Now, that's the thing. It's so close right now. If you look here, it's only about $6 million. Depending on how... I use a variety of different sites when I'm looking at numbers. Depending on how you keep records and how people calculate certain things. Some people have Endgame just slightly behind Titanic. If you look at Box Office Mojo, it's just above Titanic.
We know what's coming.
As we sit here right now, regardless, whether or not yesterday, based on yesterday's grosses, it had passed Titanic, today it has passed Titanic. It is the number 2 grossing film of all time.
Interesting thing about those 5 movies, 3 of the 5 feature Zoe Saldana.
That is true.
She's in 3 of the 5 highest grossing films worldwide of all time. That is amazing.
Well, Chris Pratt's in what, 2 of them?
Chris Pratt's in 2.
It's the same.
Well, I mean, a lot of people are in
franchise.
A lot of people
That's
are
true.
in those 2.
A lot of people are in those 2.
But that third one,
does it? Wait, Disney owns all of those now.
Yes.
I just thought about that because I was looking. That's Fox, Disney, Fox, Disney. So
yeah.
I didn't realize until just sitting here just now is whether by production or now intellectual property, Disney now owns the top 5 highest grossing movies of all time.
Yeah, I mean, I tweeted that too. People are like so cut, and we'll talk about it. The Avatar versus Endgame race, Mickey wins either way.
Mickey does win either way. Yeah. It's really for the history buffs. It's for the numbers buffs like me. Either way, Endgame is now the number 2, or if you're calculating slightly differently, will be the number 2 grossing film of all time, which means it just has Avatar in its sights now. And given the fact that it reached $2.1 billion over less than 2 weeks, a lot of people are saying like it is a fait accompli. It is going to happen. Most people are calling it inevitable. I'm saying it might be Iron Man. It might be. If you've seen the movie, you get that. Here's why. Let's look at them side by side. We started this last week as far as the race to the all-time global record. Right now, the United States still that's holding steady. It was about 27% of the global market for Avatar. It's about 28% of the global market for Avengers Endgame. China again. A much bigger chunk of the global market, 26% for Endgame versus just 7% for Avatar. This is the big number that I think is important, which is that all other markets made up 66% of Avatar's total gross, which means that 2/3 of its money came from markets outside the United States and China. Versus all other markets for Avengers Endgame are making up just 46% of its gross. It means 54% of Avengers Endgame's gross is coming through China and the United States. So, which is why I think it's important to look at how much money is left for it to reach that $2.787 billion and where it's coming from. So if you're looking at China, we talked about this a lot before, Lon. China is a very heavily front-loaded market.
Right.
A movie will come out, it'll make a massive amount of money in a very short amount of time, and then it will drop off very quickly in favor of the next big release come out, and it's very cyclical that way.
Yeah.
Analysts have looked at what it's done in China. It's made $575 million-ish right there now. They're looking at maybe another $40 to $50 million for Endgame coming out of China, but there are also some big releases coming up, including this weekend.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at another $50 million for Avengers Endgame coming out of China, because it is very front-loaded, a very front-loaded market, let's look at where it is in the United States. Let's say, again, a lot of people are saying like, well, look how it's doing against The Force Awakens. It's tracking ahead of it. It's doing that. But The Force Awakens was at the end of the year. It had January and February and March to continue to play. Whereas Avengers Endgame is running into, again, starting this weekend, some very serious competition at the box office. But assuming, let's say that it makes it to another to $900 million domestically, it may go higher. It may very well go higher. These are just a bit conservative estimates. This is me just saying, like, there is a scenario where passing Avatar is not inevitable. Let's say it makes it to $900 million domestically. That means it would need to make another $270 million from the other foreign markets. Now, that's doable. That's definitely doable.
Right.
But it becomes even more critical how the movie performs in the rest of the world in the next few weeks. Detective Pikachu comes out this week. It hits several major markets, including China, this weekend, which is why looking at Avengers Endgame and looking at Avatar, I think this is the critical weekend, looking at the numbers.
Right.
And seeing not just how it does domestically and not just how it does in China, but how it does around the rest of the world to decide. I know when you've seen that it's done the amount of money that it's done in the last however many 10, 12 days, that, oh, well, it's going to make it there easily. That last 600 million.
Yeah,
it's not inconsequential. It's still a lot of money.
That's a lot of money. I mean, that's what we're looking at, numbers that are so big that you can forget that if a movie comes out and makes $600 million, that's a lot of money, like all on its own.
$600 million is not an insubstantial amount of money.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think what we're going to see this weekend is when faced with a decision. Because up until now, audiences have been like, I'm going to go see Endgame as many times as I can.
Yeah.
But now we're going to see, when faced with a decision between seeing Endgame again and seeing something new that hits a lot of the same demo,
what will people decide?
Right.
It may be that they break heavily in front of Endgame. It may be that they choose both. That we see a healthy debut from Detective Pikachu, and that we see a good hold up from Avengers Endgame. It may be that they still list slightly towards Endgame. It's been out 2 weeks. People are itching for that second or third or fourth or fifth or eighth viewing, and they keep going to Endgame. I'm not saying that it's not going to break the record. I'm just saying that, like, I see a lot of things online of people saying, like, oh, it's a done deal. I think it's a lot more likely sitting here today than I thought it was last week, just looking at the numbers week by week. But I think you do still have to look at the numbers as they come in and don't project so far out that, it's a definite thing. It's definitely going to happen.
Every weekend from now through the rest of the summer, there's at least one big release that's going to contend for this same audience.
Yeah, I think that this weekend is very critical to how it does around the world, because it doesn't have any markets left.
Right.
It's saturation.
It's been open everywhere.
It's been open everywhere. The big rush of people have rushed out to see it. And
there's a big niche fan thing coming out that everybody's pumped for.
There is. I mean, Detective Pikachu is a movie that people have pegged as, and I honestly think it could go either way. I don't know. I could see there being a huge global rush for this. Pokemon is a very popular thing, a cross-generational type of thing. People my age, people younger than us that have done Pokemon in different versions, card games, portable games, cartoon, you name it.
Right. But it's not one of those things that's a sure thing. It's not. We don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
We don't know. So I think it's certainly on a pace to make a really serious run at it. And like I said, I think it's more likely this week than it was last week, because it did what it needed to do in its second week, which is to rack up very strong weekday grosses, have not a 70% weekend drop off from market to market. It proved that it was not just a completely front-loaded movie. But I'm also not at the point where I'm going to sit there and say, like, oh, well, it's definitely going to happen, because this is where we are in the end game now, as far as Avatar goes. They're hoping that Thanos does not snap his fingers at their record, but because this is where we really start to separate Endgame from the other films and see if it is going to drop off as it gets competition, or is it going to survive that competition. Not survive, it's doing fine. It's great. It's wonderful. But as far as that quest for the record, is it going to survive that competition? We'll find out. We'll talk about it next week.
Drama of charting.
The drama of charting. I mean, for SEO purposes, I would love it to break the record because that just means I can put a cool title in it that says we have a new #1 worldwide because,
Thanos snapping and Navi disappearing.
That's exactly, except with the Titanic, what's on our thumbnail for this episode. Damn it, Lon, we have to come up with a new idea. No, as a journalist, which I am not, but as a fan, I would love for that to happen because it's an interesting angle to cover on the show.
It's good thumbnails.
It's great thumbnails. The race is also fun to watch. Also, speaking of races and jockeying for competition and looking at grosses, lest you thought that we forgot, our summer prediction show, a Screen Junkies tradition, is going to air. It will air this weekend. Usually it airs right before the first weekend in May, but because Avengers moved to April, the summer movie season started in earnest a little bit later. I think Detective Pikachu is the first big challenger for what a top 10 movie could be.
Yeah.
So we had a little bit extra time. But our summer predictions will be up this weekend. So make your list if you like to make your list. We certainly had fun making ours. But since it is the first weekend in May and it's now what people call summer, we didn't include Avengers Endgame in the summer, and I'll tell you why. At a certain point, you're arguing with weather. And we're just not in the position to do that. We put Infinity War on there last year because it was supposed to open in May and they pushed it back last minute. But Avengers Endgame is not included on our summer.
It's an April movie.
It's an April movie.
April's not the summer.
I can't argue with the climate, Lon. A lot of other people try to, but I'm not going to.
No. There are rules.
There are rules.
We're living in a society.
It's not chaos, Lon. So Avengers Endgame is not part of our summer predictions contest, but you can see our picks this weekend. But we do start the summer movie report. Remember that one?
Oh, I remember.
I love the
fondly.
summer movie report. This is, I believe, our 4th summer.
Sounds right.
Tracking the summer box office on some form of the show, either behind our paywall or now, thankfully, here in front of all of you.
Paywall. Welcome.
Much more fun with a bigger audience. Although I miss Sasha. She had a board, she had a screen.
It was a whole thing.
It was a whole thing. But let's take a look at the summer movie report for this year. So far, it's the 3 top grossing new movies.
Wow. Live it up, Dennis Quaid.
Congratulations, Dennis Quaid. You are a top summer 2019.
And your creepy smile.
For 1 week. And then you'll get bumped down by Detective Pikachu and probably definitely 2 or 3 other movies that are opening this weekend. Yeah. But if you don't know what we do every week through September, going up to Labor Day, we track the summer releases specifically to see what the top 10 domestic grossers of the year will be. We run a fun little competition, which you'll see us picking our things for this weekend. But so we'll be tracking the summer box office every week from now through the end of the summer, Lawn. But let's look at the 2019 domestic overall box office. Avengers Endgame finished the work it started last week. It's now the #1 movie of the year domestically, taking its place alongside the global #1, which it won last week. Captain Marvel down to #2. The only other movement on the chart, Dumbo jumps up over the upside, 109 million to 108 million. This list is going to start changing pretty quickly as we go through the summer. Let's look at the 2019 worldwide list. No real changes on this list. Endgame was already #1. As a matter of fact, everything pretty much stays put.
Yep.
Us at #10, Pegasus, Crazy Alien, and The Wandering Earth. 3 Chinese releases still there in the top 10. But
Pro
Avengers,
tip, Wandering Earth on Netflix now.
That's true. Thank you for mentioning that, Lon. Yeah, Wandering Earth is on Netflix right now.
They just put it up. Not a lot of fanfare. They're not promoting it heavily.
Which it's the 3rd highest grossing movie of the year globally.
You would think they would put a trailer, make it a thing like, hey, watch this huge movie, but I guess they figured the subtitles is too much for people.
I guess, yeah. That's a good PSA. If you watch this show and you want to be sort of in the know on everything that's happening worldwide. The Wandering Earth is a phenomenally successful movie. Most of that movie came from China. I saw it. I think it's no different than your average summer blockbuster here in the U.S. Plus, I just like to see the strides that Chinese cinema is making towards blockbuster filmmaking in their own right. If you want to see The Wandering Earth, you can check it out on Netflix. Thank you for reminding me about that, Lon, because you should. I think it's worth your time. It's a really weird. It's a crazy. You you're gonna know in the first 5 minutes.
If
you're
for
not gonna
you.
go with this conceit, then it's not gonna be for you. But I was with it. I was with the conceit.
High concept, big budget, sci-fi action. Sounds good to me.
I'll take it.
Yeah.
So that list will be changing, but what won't be changing is us here talking about the numbers, Lon. Thank you for
excited.
joining me.
Always a pleasure.
This week, Detective Pikachu hitting theaters. Also, The Hustle with Anne Hathaway and Rebel Wilson. It's a remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Yeah. I had no idea that was a remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels until like last week.
Yep. Remake of Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Dirty Rotten Scoundrels.
Palms with Diane Keaton opening, and also Fox Searchlight opening Tolkien with Nicholas Hoult, J.R. Tolkien unauthorized biopic.
Right. Yes.
So, plenty of options for you to choose from this weekend. We're going to see how Avengers Endgame does. Will it break Avatar's record? We'll know a lot more this time next weekend.
Yes.
It's just fun to watch, and whether it does or whether it doesn't, we are seeing history being made, and it really is the only major record left for it to break, so I guess it would be pretty fitting if it broke that one too.
But don't send mean things to James Cameron on Twitter, you guys. You're better than that.
He doesn't care. Come on,
He doesn't.
James Cameron. He's just gonna make Avatar 2, 3, and 4 just win.
Just to spite them.
By 2024, the top 5 is gonna be all Avatars. He will make it happen. I don't know how.
Yeah. They're shooting like 2 through 8 right now, I think, right?
He's gonna make it happen. Until we are taken over by Avatar, which again, as Lon mentioned, is still a win for Disney. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week.